Oh no, Sony have released a new 135. I bet you Gordon's going to try and convince me to buy it. It's probably the sharpest lens in the universe, isn't it? Ugh. I do love my Canon 135 though. I don't think Gordon knows how loyal I am to Canon. I guess my Canon is getting a bit old now. If only I could get my hands on this new Sony lens.
Ben! You will go to the Sony system.
Sony?
There you will test the FE 135mm f1.8 G Master and learn from Roger from Lens Rentals, who says it's the sharpest lens he's ever tested. Period. Oh, and Ben, don't forget to promote my merchandise, my book and the coffee donations.
Merchandise? As you can tell from this playful intro, Gordon is constantly trying to separate me from my beloved Canon digital SLR. At the moment I'm straddling two systems. I've got the Canon digital SLR and I've got the Sony a7 III. Gordon wants me to make the complete switch, sell up all of my Canon gear and move over to Sony. But if you're like me, you've probably heavily invested in Canon cameras and mainly lenses, and to make the switch from any system in fact is a very expensive pursuit, especially if you're jumping from Canon to Sony. And this is one of those lenses that is keeping people loyal to Canon. It's their 135 f2. So the question is Sony's new 135 enough to turn people like me away from Canon for good? Let's find out. My name's Ben Harvey, I'm an architect, a photographer, a YouTube creator, and Gordon has asked me to make this video because I am a long-term Canon user. I've been in the Canon system for about 15 years now. I've built up quite a range of L-series lenses. That used to be a boast, but if you're thinking of switching systems, having that many lenses is not such a good idea. It's probably the lenses that you've invested in which would hold you to a Canon system more than anything else. This lens is from 1996 and this lens alone is keeping some people in the Canon system. Now Gordon hasn't asked me to do a technical review of this lens, he's already done that. He's the master of technical reviews, so I'm not going to step on his toes there. But he doesn't use this Canon and this lens, and he hasn't done for a few years now. He's asked me to do more of a user experience of using this lens versus my trusty Canon setup. To give some perspective to how old this lens is that I'm comparing to something that has just been released. In 1996, DVDs were invented, eBay launched. There was no eBay at the time that this lens was released. Anyway, back on topic. Impressive that Canon haven't bothered to update this. Perhaps that is why people love this lens so much. This is my camera bag that I use for shooting portraits. In this bag, I have one camera and two lenses. Canon 5D Mark III, the 50mm 1.2 and the 135 f2. According to my Lightroom, so these combined, I've shot over 20,000 photographs of my friends and family. I'd say I'm quite familiar with this setup. So who exactly is this video for? I think that this video is for one of three people. The first is Sony users. Sony users want to know what this lens is like, and rather than just know what this lens is like in isolation, compare it against other 135 lenses. The second group of people who I think might be watching this are people that are thinking about switching from Canon to Sony. Maybe now that this 135 lens is an option, maybe that was their favourite lens in the Canon system and they think, do you know what, now Sony have got one, I'm ready to jump. The third group of people that might be watching this might have a setup that looks a bit like this. Does this setup look familiar to some of you? You've got yourself a lovely new mirrorless camera here, a dirty adapter in the middle, and your Canon glass that you kept because you love it and you can't afford the Sony equivalent. Now you've got options. Some of you may not own a 135 and you're interested in getting one. If you go online, people that own a 135 will say, yes, great lens, you should definitely get one. People that don't own a 135 will tell you to get a 70-200. Now, I had the 70-200 2.8 and I sold it so that I could get this f4. The 2.8 was about this long, it's about this wide and twice as heavy. It was so heavy, I didn't want to take it out. Let me explain why the 70-200 2.8 didn't work for me. This is a one-handed camera lens combo setup. This hand is free to pose, point, direct, etc, etc. Then I can take the shot, support, but I've always got this one hand free. With the 70-200, the tripod mount is on the lens. You are mounting the lens to a tripod, not the camera anymore. That's when you know you've got a heavy lens. So that is why I sold my 70-200 and I got the 135 f2 and I do not regret it whatsoever. Okay, so I've been using this Sony lens for over a week now and the weight of it is tolerable actually. I'm not complaining about the weight of it. It's not a light lens. I think we're gonna have to put these on the scales. Overall, feels like the Sony is just a little bit heavier, but that does have a slightly faster aperture, 1.8 versus f2. Perhaps that's what's making the difference. So that's the Canon 5D Mark III 135 f2. Right, so that is 1435 grams. Okay, Sony A7 III with the 135 1473. My hunch was good. It weighs just a smidge more. Alright, okay, slight change of plan. When I started making this video, I was going to be using the Canon 135 on my 5D Mark III. However, it turns out if you're Gordon and you ask nicely, Canon will send you a brand new mirrorless camera. And what Gordon gets, in this video I get, winning. So I've got the new Canon RP in here. I could get used to having all of this gear at my disposal. Oh, and it comes with some lenses as well. I'm going to be now comparing the Canon 135 on the new Canon EOS RP. So now with this new setup, the Canon is 180 grams lighter than the Sony 135 equivalent. See, I mainly use this lens for taking photographs of friends and family, but I didn't particularly want my children to be in this video. Photographing my children would have been a much better focusing test for this lens. So instead, my work colleague Michaela has offered to model for me in exchange for a new profile picture and an Instax photograph of her, so let's find out how that went. Okay, first up, portrait shot of Michaela here. We've got the Canon on the left hand side and the Sony on the right hand side. These settings are almost the same. On the right hand side you've got a 1.8 aperture. The Canon doesn't have that, so I've set that to f2. I could have set this to f2, but what's the point? It's a 1.8, let's do it. You may disagree with me, but from this complete shot here, I don't think many people could tell the difference between, oh, that one is clearly better than the other. But it's when you zoom in a little bit, that's when you start to see the differences. The Canon on the left again, the Sony on the right. You can see a lot more detail in the eyes. Zooming in a little bit more, look away Michaela, this might get a bit uncomfortable. This is the only time you should ever zoom into a photograph this close, but you can see here, this is at 1.8, the new Sony lens. Look at the detail in the eye. You can see me, you can see that I've got my arm bent, I'm standing in front of some windows. The detail in this is ridiculous. The Canon's doing a good job, but when you look closer, it can't compete with the Sony here. Let's zoom back out again. Whoa, there we go. Here's another shot. Okay, this isn't scientific. I was taking a photograph of Michaela, putting that camera down, picking up the other camera. That is why she doesn't have identical poses in these images. This isn't typical of my workflow. These are straight out of camera. I would normally edit these images before anybody gets to see them online. I had to shoot in JPEG because the RAW files of the EOS RP are not yet supported. So these are straight out of camera JPEGs. The image on the left hand side is the Canon again, and the one on the right hand side is the Sony. You have got quite a difference in the skin tones. Now the Sony, although I don't like the skin tones here, it has a lot more dynamic range. You can see the shadow on Michaela's face here. Do you want to do some zooming? Are you ready? This one I think is even more significant than the last one. If I didn't tell you which one was which, you might not be able to tell which was the Canon and which one was the Sony, but as soon as you zoom in, it becomes quite obvious. The Canon on the left hand side the Sony on the right. Look at the detail. Look at the detail in the Sony one. This is once again wide open at f1.8. And for comparison, I also put the Canon 135 onto the Sony on the Sigma MC11 adapter, and for stills that was performing very well. Obviously it can't make the lens any sharper, but the focusing, when you put it onto the Sony, you've now got eye detection, so that is pretty handy. Yeah, it worked very well actually. Now, as a bit of a social experiment, I posted these images onto a Facebook photography group just to see if my fellow photographers could tell the difference between these two lenses. Okay folks, which one do you think is the latest Sony lens and which one is from 1996? And it wasn't conclusive. When you post something like this to social media, people with a trained eye couldn't tell you which lens was which. And then I hit them with the close-ups and it was instant. Everybody said, right, okay, I can see that's the Sony now. So moving on to video, next up is the Canon 135 on the EOS RP. You can see from this video clip here, I'm focusing on Michaela, then an object in the foreground, then back to Michaela. It's finding the object confidently, but it's not exactly rapid, it's quite leisurely. This isn't a go-to lens that I would use for video. Sorry about the shaky footage, neither the lens or the camera have built-in stabilisation. And now for the turbocharged Sony lens. Look at the rate that this focuses, all the way from the back to the front, to the back to the front. It is a quick lens. Whatever they've put inside this lens, it is working. Sorry about this footage, this is not me, this is what happens when you put the Canon lens onto the Sigma MC11 adapter and you put it on the Sony and press record. In this video, I'm pressing down the shutter button so that it finds focus. All it does is it hunts from the front to the back to the front to the back, and it's not even attempting to find anything in focus. It's very kind of Sony to have put a nice rubber end to this lens, but who puts their camera down on a surface like this anyway? Put it down gently like this. If I could, I would carry a small pillow everywhere with me to put my cameras down. It's getting dark here in London. I wish I had a fast lens. I'm not one of these photographers that dangles a heavy lens by the camera body. This looks a bit like it might break the camera if you do this too often. I found it a bit uncomfortable to carry the lens like this. I actually found myself carrying the lens like this. All Sonys have this nifty little ridge in here where you put your hand. I find this a bit more comfortable to carry it like that. But be careful doing that because this button here releases the lens. So I've already used the Sony G Master lens for portraits indoors, a bit of architecture, some landscapes at sunrise and sunset. Today I'm going to be shooting some outdoor portraits. My friend Sophia has agreed to model for me. She is also a portrait photographer. No pressure, Ben. Because I've got the Canon and the Sony, I'm not going to be filming at the same time. It's not possible for me to carry 3 cameras, so once we're done here, I'll jump back to the office and I'll talk you through my images on the computer. Whilst we're outdoors, I thought I'd challenge this lens to some backlit situation. Here is Sophia, backlit, very much so. I am leaving the camera and the lens to do all the focusing, and it's absolutely nailed the focus, as you can see here. So well done to the Sony lens there. I said I bumped into my colleague Mark whilst I was down on the seafront, and he said, oh, you couldn't take some pictures of me skateboarding, so why not? Another backlit situation. Sometimes a challenge for a camera. Seems to have done an excellent job of focusing on him. So you can see, once again, this is the camera in autofocus mode. The camera and the lens are doing all of the work. You can see here, it lost the focus here, then it's picked him up again. So you can see the hit rate is pretty good. Okay, I know that these are not the same photograph. I had to take one photograph, put the camera down, and then pick up the other camera. The Canon on the left, the Sony on the right hand side, you could edit them to look very similar. If you were to post these images online, people wouldn't be able to tell which one was taken on which camera until you zoom in, and then you go, whoa, what is going on with the Sony? How is that even possible at 1.8 when you zoom in to the maximum on a photograph and you get this incredible amount of detail? That is absolutely incredible, and that is what I'm talking about when you look on the back of the camera and you press the plus button to zoom in, and this is what you're confronted with on the Sony. I'm used to this. The Sony gives you this. Wow. Well, what do I think after having this for a few years and having this new Sony G Master lens for 2 weeks? This is a friggin' awesome lens, there's no denying that. It is sharp as hell, it's lovely to use, it's quick. You can't complain about the performance of this lens and camera combo. The weight is tolerable, it wouldn't put me off having this lens. I reckon you could hold that for a good few hours. You're gonna feel it, but it's not 70 to 200, 2.8 sort of, my arm's going to fall off. The aperture ring here, just the way that I shoot, I didn't even bother changing the aperture whatsoever. People buying this lens are going to use it at 1.8 as much as possible. The Sony is pretty much better than the Canon in every single technical way. The design of it, the Canon looks like it was designed 23 years ago. It's nice, but things have moved on a lot since 1996. If you're looking for a piece of bling to look good on the front of your camera, the Sony's going to be the tool for you as well. Where does the Canon win the argument? Well, it's lighter. The second thing that the Canon wins on is filter size. This has got a 72mm diameter, and I have filters that go up to 72mm. The Sony's 82mm, I don't have any 82mm filters, so I couldn't actually use this for video. I'd have to go out and buy some new filters. It's significantly cheaper, so the Canon is about a third of the price of this second hand. Neither of these lenses are stabilized, but don't forget, when you buy a Sony, the Sony body is stabilized, so that is another win to the Sony. But if you're adapting the Canon lens onto a Sony body, then this also becomes stabilized. Also, do not overestimate the difference with the focusing distance that this makes. There are so many times when I was shooting with the Canon and I had to step back from my model, the camera still wasn't focusing, I had to step back. You can probably focus twice as close using the Sony as you can with the Canon. That is definitely a benefit with the Sony. And another win for the Sony, these custom buttons on the side of the lens, which the Canon obviously doesn't have. That's your landscape one, that's your portrait one. Now, I set this up so that this enabled the eye detection, because by default at the moment, the Sony, you have to press a second button as well as the shutter button. That was quite handy, so that's another win to Sony. If you remember at the beginning of this video, I said that I think that this video will be for 3 groups of people. Let's recap. The first group of people are going to be people that are in the Sony system. Probably watching this to find out how their investment compares to what they left behind. You can be pretty smug about it, I'd say. You're gonna have to pay 2 grand for this lens. The second group of people that might be watching this are people that are in the Canon system and they're thinking, the only reason I'm hanging about in the Canon camp is because of this 135, but now Sony have released a 135. I think I'm ready to jump ship. Well, the same rules apply. If you need the best of the best, get the Sony. But you do pay for that luxury. If you want very good images, stick with your Canon and stick with the 135 that you already own. And finally, the third group of people that might be watching this are people that have already bought a Sony camera, but they've still got a ton of Canon glass. So that might be you. You might have the Canon 135 on an adapter on your Sony right now. And for stills, that worked really well. The eye detection was working, the face detection, it was quick at focusing, you've got focus peaking if you were doing manual focus. It's also stabilized because you put it on a Sony camera. So if that's you, should you buy the new Sony lens? If you've got 2 grand and you want the best of the best, yes. I've asked myself whether or not I need more sharpness out of my 135. And the answer is no, because I print a lot of my work, but this is as big as my prints get. This is not going to disappoint you if you're uploading your images to Facebook, Instagram, or even printing at a reasonable size. The Canon lens is going to do you justice all the time. If Gordon said to me right now, you can keep the Sony, Ben, but you've got to give me your Canon, I would definitely take the Sony. You'd be stupid not to take this. Even if it is too sharp, which is a stupid thing to say, you would take this because it is the best of the best. There's no need for this level of performance for what I do. But we all lust after this, don't we? Us photographers get so caught up in the sharpness and the colour fringing and the imperfections. Ironically, I buy the best lenses so that I don't have darkened edges. Whilst I'm editing it, I'll go and put a vignette on it. It doesn't make any sense. With this lens, you can just shoot at 1.8 the whole time and be very happy with the results. This is clearly what you get for 23 years worth of lens development. Of course the Sony was always going to win, but it's not about technical performance, it's about how it handles and what it's like to use. And the Sony was delightful to use. Obviously this is on a Sony camera, which is a different experience to shooting with a Canon. And to give you an idea, when I use my Sony for shooting portraits, I hand over all focusing responsibility to the Sony. I've got that much confidence in it. When I resorted to my Canon with my setup, I'm using single point focusing. That's it. I just put the focus point over the subject's eye. The reality is that this just feels like very old tech now. But if you don't care about what people think of you as a photographer and it's just about the end result, then this will produce beautiful images. So if you're a Sony shooter and I've just convinced you to buy the lens, I'm sorry, you probably sold it to yourself anyway. If you're a Canon shooter and you're going to stick with the Canon system, I just saved you a ton of money, you're welcome. Thanks to Gordon for letting me make this video. Thank you to Sony for constantly giving Gordon lots of toys to play with. Well, it's been emotional, I must give this back to Gordon now. Let's go and see him in Brighton. Well, I guess at some point I'm going to have to give this lens back to Gordon, but the thing is, he's so busy all the time, he's always travelling, he never gets back to me. I just don't get it. I thought he wanted the lens back. I don't know what's up with him. Why isn't he replying to me? Maybe I'll just keep hold of the lens for now. Alright, see you in the next video. The things I do for you, Gordon. It's a really hot day. I'm dressing up in all of my Arctic gear. I've got a funky white balance on my camera and I've put bed sheets over all of my belongings in my bedroom for this makeshift Arctic scene that we're doing.